I'm confident that Vietnam will be able to, weather this storm quite soon. But apparently with the US and the Europe and even China picking up a little bit slower than expected, I think we will see this pressure coming in all the way up to the 3/4 of this year and maybe start to, positively pick up in the 4th quarter of this year or even going into next year. And Vietnam is also a frontier market currently on the verge of becoming an emerging market in the next coming years. So based on the experience in other countries, if Vietnam does actually enter into an emerging market status, then we'll see, 5 times of investments actually flowing back into Vietnam, which will also help out. Vietnam has come a long way and a lot of potentials. So I think going beyond the electronics, I'm sure Vietnam will also be able to enter into that EV sector, the semiconductor sector as well, on the more high value added kind of industry. At the same time, leveraging on the wider, domestic consumption market, where HSBC actually believes by 2030, Vietnam's private consumption market will outpace that of, UK, Thailand, as well as Germany.
Đây là TheInsight, nơi trò chuyện cùng những người chủ doanh nghiệp và chuyên gia đầu ngành để cùng trao đổi và phân tích về những vấn đề đang nổi lên trên thị trường kinh doanh và đầu tư. Tôi là Lan Anh và khách mời ngày hôm nay của chúng ta là ông Joon Suk Park, Giám đốc Khối Kinh doanh Quốc tế, Dịch vụ Ngân hàng Doanh nghiệp tại HSBC Việt Nam.
Xin chào mọi người.
Welcome to TheInsight, JS. Yeah, thanks so much for your presence here today. Yeah, well, during your 17 years of experience at HSBC, you have promoted many investment activities of multinational corporations into various markets. So during this podcast, I would like to discuss with you about your role in HSBC Vietnam, as well as how your team attract FDI into Vietnam, right?
Sure. Lan, thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I found in your latest report that there has been a sluggish growth in the Vietnamese economy, as many indicators declined. And it is clear that the economy still suffers a variety of difficulties during the 2nd quarter of this year. So how do you perceive the Vietnamese investment environment right now, given this situation?
Sure. So, Long, I think if you look at the Vietnamese economy over the years, it's really successfully transformed into a very export-oriented economy. At the same time, if you notice, exports alone, the value itself is more than 100% of GDP. If you look at the FDI, FDIs also contribute to more than 70% of those exports going out. So I think as the economy has transitioned into a export-oriented economy, with FDIs becoming very, very important, I think it's very important to note that Vietnam's well-being, the economic macro, really depends on how well the rest of the world also operates. So if you see from the export destinations, I think US and Europe combined are more than 60% of the destination which Vietnam exports out. At the same time, if you look at US alone, they import more than 60% of all the wood and furniture kind of items exported out of Vietnam. And at the same time, if you look at all the general machineries as well, more than 50% of those are imported directly by the US. So it's very important that we have the well-being of these economies. But nevertheless, I think starting last year, there's been a bit of a inflationary pressure. Commodity prices have been going up as well. So coming at the end of the 3rd quarter of last year and really going into the 4th quarter and into the 1st quarter of this year as well, Vietnam has now started to feel that pinch. So we see the economy going down a little bit in the sense that trade, the statistics are coming down, imports are coming down, exports are coming down. The purchasing manager index PMI is also coming down. It used to be above 50, but it's now all the way down to 46 level. So I think if you look at a little bit of a bright spot on the Vietnamese economy at this stage, probably more around the wider retail sector. And when we talk about the wider retail sector, it's more around the services related. And at the same time, the tourism related sectors are doing a little bit much better than the conventional export or the FDI coming into the country. So if you look at the tourism, for example, last year, the full year, we had about 3.6 million. As of, I think, April of this year alone, we already have 4.6 million. So I think Vietnam is on a good target to bring in about 10 million tourists this year. And if you remember back in 2019, pre-COVID, Vietnam usually used to have around 80 million tourists, which was about 3 to 4% of GDP. So this will help, to buttress the economy a little bit better as we see a little bit of downturn on the trade side. But I think it's a bit transitionary and a cyclical kind of experience that Vietnam is having at the moment. So I think I'm confident that Vietnam will be able to, weather this storm quite soon. But apparently with the US and the Europe and even China picking up a little bit slower than expected, I think we will see this pressure coming in all the way up to 3/4 of this year and maybe start to, positively pick up in the 4th quarter of this year or even going into next year.
But talking about the investment environment in particular, how do you compare the Vietnamese market with other countries in the region, in the long term? Yeah.
So when I look at the Vietnamese economy, fundamentally now, Vietnam has strengthened in several sectors. So, when we talk about Vietnamese economy, there's a strength in terms of building out a very strong supply chain ecosystem, especially in the manufacturing sector. So this has been over the years, and it's been really helped out by the electronics sector. So if you look at back in 2000, the electronics export from Vietnam to the rest of the world was maybe less than 5% of total export. But as of today, it's more than 30%. So the electronics sector is, as well as the textiles and footwear and all of these traditional sectors representing Vietnam, has really helped Vietnam to establish the supply chain ecosystem on the manufacturing side, which has really helped out. Secondly, if you look at the domestic consumption market, it's still a 100 million population. There's a lot of tech-savvy young generation and a growing middle-income class. So I think this is also helping out and being characteristic of Vietnam. And Vietnam is also a frontier market currently on the verge of becoming an emerging market in the next coming years. So based on the experience in other countries, if Vietnam does actually enter into an emerging market status, then we'll see, 5 times of investments actually flowing back into Vietnam, which will also help out. And then, of course, we also need to talk about the sustainability angle, which pre-COVID we didn't have much discussion around. But on this ESG front, with Vietnam's commitment, I think Vietnam is also in a very positive and strong position to be able to lead the renewables kind of sector as well. If I just look at the ASEAN countries, they have their characteristic industries. So if you look at Singapore, for example, it's a manufacturing hub for semiconductors on the front end and equipment and wafer fabrication. They're also kind of leading on the healthcare system as well as on the financial digitalization. If you look at Malaysia, it's a story about the back-end semiconductor. They do a lot of hub kind of work around testing as well as back-end equipments. And if you look at Thailand, it's more about the auto ecosystem that they're building out. And Indonesia is increasingly leveraging on their nickel kind of abundance to build out their own kind of EV ecosystem in Indonesia as well. So again, when we look at Vietnam, Vietnam has come a long way and a lot of potentials. So I think going beyond the electronics, I'm sure Vietnam will also be able to enter into that EV sector, the semiconductor sector as well, on the more high value added kind of industry. At the same time, leveraging on the wider, domestic consumption market, where HSBC actually believes by 2030, Vietnam's private consumption market will outpace that of, UK, Thailand, as well as Germany. So from a wider retail sector, there are a lot of investment potentials that, further coming into the country in that sense. And of course, on the digitalization as well as on the sustainability, I think all of these sectors where Vietnam will be able to excel in the coming years.
So I can understand that now we are in a very challenging period. However, there are more and more opportunities waiting for us in the future, right? And yeah, I'm totally surprised when I found an official landing page from HSBC where you introduce very carefully about the Vietnamese economy as well as the opportunities for big corporations coming to Vietnam. Yeah, is that your primary goal, like to enhance the visibility of Vietnam in the global economy map?
So I think, Lan, if you look at the benefits of HSBC, I think one of our key strategy and pillars of strategy is on international connectivity. So as we are present in more than 60 markets globally, we're able to provide that connectivity to a lot of our customers on a global basis. When I speak to a lot of European or US counterparts, I think when the topic of Asia comes up, it's still very much around China, India, or Singapore, because these are the larger markets. So as for the smaller sites, and especially because Vietnam is a frontier market going into the emerging market status, it's really my job to sell Vietnam and make it a little bit more visible out there. And I think that's the benefit of having HSBC in all of these 60 different markets on a global basis.
But how do you and your team sell Vietnam, like especially in a very difficult time right now?
So I think I would say in a difficult time, it's a little bit more easier to sell Vietnam.
Really?
Because there's a lot of stories that we can tell about the Vietnam's growth story. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the fundamentals of Vietnam's economy, driven by exports and the fact that, for example, foreign investors coming into Vietnam and setting up operations, for example, one of the key benefits that they will get is that they will be able to get a highway pass to the rest of the world. Meaning with the numerous number of FTAs or the free trade agreements that the government has been progressively kind of establishing even during the COVID period, I think this has really set the platform for a lot of multinationals to be able to benefit off from. As a result of which, if they do produce, for example, something in Vietnam, they're able to ship it out and export to more than 55 markets globally and 15 of the G20 markets as well. So I think this is one of the huge benefits that the Vietnamese economy can provide. So from our perspective, we do a lot of selling around the progressive nature of the regulators in bringing in FDIs or attracting FDIs into the country. We talk a lot about the production and the cost effectiveness of Vietnam still compared to the other countries. And we also talk about the sustainability edge where the Vietnam's government is quite eager to go net carbon neutral by 2050. So a lot of these selling we do through webinars, we do a lot of roadshows. And if you look at a lot of these FDIs actually coming into the country in Vietnam, 70% of these are intra-Asia kind of investments. So these are investments coming in from the likes of Japan, China, or even Korea and Taiwan. A lot of these intra-Asia stories where we have strong presence. So meaning we do physical roadshows. We go to and visit those sites, and together with our colleagues in HSBC in China or Taiwan or even Thailand, we're able to meet the headquarters CFOs and the treasurers and able to pitch them live in terms of what are the benefits of investing in Vietnam. So we do a lot of webinars again on the roadshows. We do a lot of research around, what is it that Vietnam can offer to these foreign investors, to help them make that decision to come into Vietnam.
So I guess you have a very talented research team, right? Yeah. Actually, as a journalist, I receive monthly report from HSBC about the Vietnamese economy. And I found them quite informative, and I think it will be very useful for corporations when considering about the investment in Vietnam. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but besides the nationality, as you know, like FDI from the Asia companies to come to Vietnam. So besides the nationality, which company from which sectors now are interested in Vietnam?
So I think, investments from abroad coming from more than 100 countries globally. I talked about a bulk of that coming from intra-Asia. But at the same time, we have, of course, Europe and the US as well as UK. We also have, investments coming in from Middle East as well. And all of these investments, I think they're attracted by the fact that recently, over the years, the Vietnamese government is more attuned towards attracting higher value investments. So now they want to venture into EV ecosystem, the semiconductor ecosystem, even the wider electronics ecosystem. They want to leverage on the growing middle income class as well as the growing private consumption market to really pitch on the wider growing retail market as well, which also includes FMCG. So a lot of these high value added kind of industries that the government wants to attract include, retail, FMCG, healthcare, higher learning on education as well, more investments on schools and universities. And we do actually see a lot of investment queries around these industries, and including the likes of the e-commerce, logistics, as well as warehousing as well. So all of these, I think, are a little bit more on the new economy kind of areas where Vietnam is doing quite well to sell to the rest of the world. And a lot of foreign investors obviously are quite interested in that space.
Yeah. And how about the investment skill they are aiming for?
Sorry, the investment
skill. Yeah, it's like how much money they want to put in Vietnamese market. Yeah.
So I think that really depends on the size of their investment, on what they want to be doing in Vietnam, whether they want to be setting up their own operations, whether they want to be partnering up with a local MME or large corporate to enter the market, or whether what they want to be coming into Vietnam through an indirect investment route, could be M&A or really investing into equity of the large corporates on the stock market as well. So I think that the investment size really varies. I mean, you see a lot of large investments coming in, especially from, I guess, electronic sector still, because the business itself needs a lot of capital expenditures and investments. But otherwise, I think if you're talking about the other retail space or maybe the other industrial sectors, they can actually come in with a smaller investment and actually reinvest, continuously invest to broaden that capital base. But I think there's no kind of right answer in terms of how much they would invest. It really depends on the industry as well as the intention on how they want to operate and leverage on the growing Vietnamese market.
Yeah, but from your perspective, do you see whether they want to penetrate this market like independently or through M&A with a domestic company or even with a foreign one already operating in this market?
So Lan Anh, I think still the predominantly a lot of foreign investors who will still come into Vietnam through FDIs, foreign direct investment, to set up their own operations, set up their own companies, and then starting their own manufacturing, or really aiming for the retail space to do more on the consumption market space. We do see quite a number of indirect investments, whether it be in the form of M&As, to acquire a local company, and then, by which way they don't really need to set up their own operation, and they can easily gain that momentum and kick off on the business. And we also see a little bit of more kind of interest from the private equity funds or the global venture funds looking into Vietnam, especially on those sectors where we see high value added kind of industries. And again, these could be education, healthcare, or e-commerce or logistics space, where they want to do a little bit more on the equity investments.
And basically, how long does it take them to finalize their decision to make investment here?
So Lan Anh, I think it really depends. But I don't think it happens overnight, obviously, because investing in a new market and learning about the market dynamics is important. But at the same time, there are a lot of considerations that they have to look at before they make the investment. They have to look at the political regime. They have to look at the regulatory regime within they will operate within Vietnam. They also have to take into consideration things like what is the level of the resource here in Vietnam? What is the availability of local supplies, for example? If they want to be part of a supply chain ecosystem in Vietnam, am I going to get the right amount and the right quality of local suppliers from Vietnam as well? So once they do these feasibility study, I think HSBC is also involved been giving them, kind of information on how to assess the consideration. But these would take time, obviously, and their interaction with the local authorities as they talk about the various different incentives. I think these would take a little bit of time as well. And in addition to that, ultimately, all of these global multinationals, they have the corporate governance system within they have to follow. They have to get the board approvals ultimately. So I think really it takes a bit of time to make that actual decision to invest into Vietnam.
Like years?
I can't really pinpoint on the time because some companies may take less than a year. Or, if they've been studying Vietnam for a long time, I think the actual decision itself may be less than 6 months. They may move really quickly as well.
And later on, as an international bank, I'm sure that you will cooperate with them when they are already doing business in Vietnam, right? But what do you think will be their key challenges when doing business in Vietnam?
I think every market has their unique challenges. So I think when we talk about Vietnam, and when we talk to a lot of multinationals or investors looking into Vietnam, a lot of it has to do with navigating the regulatory waters of Vietnam, because in many times it's not really straightforward. So they have to do a lot of interpretations. They have to seek advice from different stakeholders, including banks such as HSBC. So I think having the right partner in that sense in Vietnam to operate and navigating the regulatory water is very important. I think the other challenge may be around the level of resources or the quality of resources. So I spoke about how Vietnam has really come up that value-added ladder on the industry side. And I think this also pertains specifically to the resources that we have too. So increasingly in Vietnam, we have more and more of skilled labor. But as we enter into more of these new economy industries, high-value industries, high-tech industries, I think the investors tend to look at the availability around R&D or, engineers or PhDs. So some of these areas, I think they still feel is a little bit challenging in terms of the resource level on that side. And I also talked about the availability of local suppliers because, as they operate in Vietnam, they want to be part of a larger supply chain ecosystem and not really having to rely heavily on imports for their parts and supplies. So I think the availability of local suppliers is also very key. And maybe a bit of a challenge for foreign investors.
So how can HSBC help them to overcome these challenges?
So, Lan, fortunately, HSBC has been in Vietnam for over 153 years. Yeah. So, I mean, just because we've been in the country a long time doesn't mean we're the best bank. But I think a lot of, features that we're able to bring to the foreign investors and to Vietnamese economy is the fact that we've been long enough to understand the market, how it's evolved and how it's developing, what are the trends on ground, what does the landscape look like. So I think we're able to also read the local nuance. So when foreign investors actually come into a new market such as Vietnam, I think they want to partner up with a bank who has these kind of knowledge base and understanding. One of the benefits of HSBC also operating for 153 years in Vietnam is we not only look at FDI multinational companies, but we have a dedicated team also, looking after the local large corporates, helping them to become a little bit more sophisticated in capital financing or other kind of sophisticated schemes. And also on the middle market enterprises, we're very keen to bank with these community as well to help them to become and evolve into a more of a local large corporates. So we're on the whole ecosystem when it comes to covering the wider kind of the community, the corporate community here in Vietnam. And to our foreign investors, we're able to bring that connection to them as well. As they enter new into the market, we can help to lay that bridge and really allow them to partner up with the local large corporates or the MMEs as well in that sense. So I think Vietnam, HSBC really brings those kind of values in addition to the product propositions that we also offer to our clients.
I believe so far you're doing so well in Vietnam. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But what's next? Like, what is your strategy for the Vietnamese market for the next 5 years?
So Lan Anh, I don't think our strategy will change. Our key strategy is to be and continue to be the number one, leading international bank for multinational customers. We want to be the leading international bank for local large corporates, as well as middle market enterprises as well. At the same time, leveraging on the presence that we have in a lot of mature economies, there's a lot of best practices that we can bring into Vietnam as well.
Yeah, I know that HSBC has been here for a long time, and you also been through in many other countries of HSBC. So looking back, how do you assess the development of HSBC in Vietnam compared to other countries that you have been through?
Fortunately, HSBC in Vietnam is a locally incorporated entity, whereas in many of the Asian sites, we are a branch of HSBC in Hong Kong. I think this really translates into the fact that HSBC Group looks at Vietnam with key priority. That's why we have a locally incorporated entity, meaning we do both wholesale banking as well as retail. Because we believe, again, on that 100 million population, the tech-savvy generation, we believe in the wealth story of Vietnam really growing in the next coming years. So I think when we look back at HSBC's footprint in Vietnam, I think we've really been able to grow together with Vietnam, and we really wish to continue to grow with Vietnam going into the near future as well.
Oh, I know that you joined HSBC in 2006. Yeah, and in total, you have over 22 years of experience in finance industry. Yeah, so what do you like in this sector?
I've been with HSBC specifically for about 17 years, and previously with other financial institutions. And I think I've also actually quite benefited by being HSBC during that 17 years and always being at the forefront of one of the key pillars of HSBC's kind of strategy, which again is on international connectivity. So when I talk about international connectivity, currently in Vietnam, my work is to bring in more, investments into Vietnam, but it works both ways, right? For a lot of these large corporates, Vietnamese large corporates, we have relationship managers looking after those names, and the purpose is not only to support them in Vietnam, but also to help them to expand overseas. Yeah. So it's both ways that we look at. So in a way, when I look at my job, I sometimes compare it to a similar, kind of characteristic that a diplomat has. So a professional diplomat, goes around different countries, stationed in different countries, and for example, selling Vietnam or other countries in those markets. So I'm doing the same thing for the past 17 years. So I've been very blessed and fortunate enough to come into Vietnam and being able to sell that Vietnam's growth story to the rest of the world and really contributing at least a little bit to bringing more FDI investments into Vietnam. So I think this is what really drives me in terms of the passion that I have for HSBC, because, you don't see too many international banks with that kind of capabilities where we operate in more than 60 markets and able to really act as a diplomat in each of those kind of different markets as well.
Yeah, so I guess your job in HSBC is very interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. And actually finance is all about will have impacts in many aspects of business and also in my life too. So I hope your journey in HSBC and will kind of help improve the Vietnamese company, and also to attract more FDI to come to Vietnam and make the whole economy to as you said, to be more visible in the global map. Yeah,
for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.